I'm kind of drawing attention to an object which might be a reprehensible object in the future. I like the idea that art is a sort of national park of objects that they're separated from the world into this other set of rules, other set of possibilities. Having come from the dust piece, a piece which I'd atomized a passenger jet aircraft, I was very much involved and interested in this apparatus, this evolved piece of very sophisticated technology. What we have is two jet engines that did a remarkable amount of mileage, acting as an armature of American surveillance. After 9/11, it was very difficult to source old equipment. The Air Force in the States decided to take its destruction of its objects in-house, rather than going through secondary places like where I found these engines. And at the time, they were trying to sell them to the Israeli Air Force, but I managed to persuade them to sell them to us instead. I think that they were intrigued by us. So I think that they were intrigued about sort of this slightly unanticipated ending for these aircraft engines. They create for us perhaps a certain sort of behavioral trap that influences our behavior in the world. And they create a certain sense of anxiety. And I think that I was very interested in the object itself, securing a more comfortable lifestyle for the Americans that were the benefactors of this global surveillance that these objects were involved in. America was protected by this. Well, there's a certain sense of its lifestyle being protected by this. So to put into the engines another dominant object of the world, another apparatus, another material made under incredible acuity, the powdered antidepressants, that seemed to make some sense. It was trying to involve or collide two very sophisticated, very contemporary materials together. There's a relationship of the anxiety that the engines perhaps perform in the world and the response to anxiety, which is the antidepressant. I'm quite interested to see if people actually even go anywhere near them. That's the other thing. Do you want to experience these things? They're not particularly inviting. I've always been taken by the rather brutal look of things. I suppose that's probably me coming from Birmingham. But it's an aesthetic which I appreciate. And it's very interesting to see the Charles Jenks. There's a certain sort of chaperoning of nature into a structure or into a form that seemed almost against its own nature somehow. It's so sculptural in its sense, it's so artificial. I was just coming from adapting nature in a certain way with seizure, and I think that it was something that I found attractive. It's something that I found useful to also see in a different version. I think it was really interesting to put the two objects rather closely together, that they did have a direct dialogue. It wasn't just another part of the landscape. They were trying to communicate something. I've always been somebody who's wanted to maybe obscure identity or to try and violate a certain sense of your own identity, and I think that not calling yourself a sculptor is part of that. Not calling yourself anything, just try to understand yourself in terms of the world without creating too many traps. I've also had a slightly problematic relationship with aesthetic and form, about the establishment of aesthetic and form in the present day. Maybe we are sort of post-ideological, and so where does aesthetic and where does form come in when that's the situation? Where are your priorities? At the end of modernism, does an object even need to have a form? And so you have all of these sort of concerns, you have all of these problems, which inherently sort of part of the issue of sculpture. And so in a way, I guess I sort of sidestep it by just saying I work with objects and just be a bit vague about things. I'm very interested in the future of materiality, and I think that that's an important role that sculpture can play in. And so in a way, I guess what I'm probably describing is is my role as an artist is to identify objects, identify procedures and ritualistic behavior perhaps too, and just isolate them, just to transpose them elsewhere, and to see what that behavior then begins. And so it's like an anti-rule. There's certain rules in the world, and there's certain choreography that applies to us as people in the world. And it's nice to separate people from that. It's nice to offer another way, another kind of way to relate.